Yeah, the African Union is set to mark the 68th anniversary of the Organization of African Unity on May the 25th, which celebrates the continent's diversity and success across political, economic, and social platforms. The events around the AU anniversary includes the Africa Soft Power Summit, which brings together a wide cross-section of communities for a week of special events in Kigali, the Rwandan capital. Nkiru Balonwu is the founder of the Africa Soft Power Project, and she joined me now for a conversation ahead of next week's Kigali events. I'm sure you're heading to Kigali anytime soon, so it's good to catch up with you before you jet off to Rwanda. Tell me, what's the significance of the Africa Day at the African Union, and what is the Africa Soft Project contributing next week?
Well, thanks, Wilson, for having me here. So the Africa Soft Power Project is about sort of propelling Africa forward, using Africa's innovation, talking about creative industries, talking about innovative industries, women's leadership. And as you said, it's about, African Union created this day, which is May 25th, to celebrate Africa Day. It's not something as really generally known around the world. So part of our project is to actually amplify that day, that is as a global celebration, as a day that everybody anywhere in the world can say, oh, you know how we celebrate Black History Month or Women's History Month or Women's Day, any of those things. Africa doesn't really have anything that's global. And that's part of the reason we're working on Africa Soft Power.
That's a good one. You're looking at soft power for big power for the continent. But again, I'm looking at some of the big issues that you think the summit will tackle next week. You've got to have 54 heads of states and other policymakers all around, including folks like yourself.
So you know how I think Ruto was talking about this a few weeks ago at the Mo Ibrahim Summit in Kenya, about how something happens, America calls, we all go, all the presidents of the different 54 countries go to Washington, we go to Paris, we go to meetings, but who really comes here? Who comes to the continent? What is our own platform? How do we sort of like get people to talk to us as equals, and how do we get the conversation around prosperity, Africa's prosperity, to lead, as opposed to always what we talk about Africa, we talk about poverty, which we do have a lot of that, but how do we get conversations around our innovation, creativity, because to solve poverty you actually have to be prosperous as well. So prosperity will solve poverty, and sort of one of the key things for us is aligning the conversation around Africa, talking about the issues around creative industries, from film, music, food, fashion, technology, travel, tourism, all of the things that sort of like make us really powerful, and sort of trying to understand how that can propel Africa forward in terms of from an economic perspective as well as a storytelling perspective and branding and reputation perspective.
Interesting, but away from that, if you look at the lack of data, inclusivity, and diversity, these are global issues that are coming on the mainstream, on the front door of discussion on Africa. Tell me about this.
Data, we think data is a critical thing for the continent. We think that without data, we can't really move forward. You can't make decisions. You can't calculate risks. We can't calculate opportunities if we don't have real data. And so for us at Africa Soft Power, data is a critical issue. There is really not a lot of data around how we consume things, for example. So one of the key things that we're looking at is women's leadership. We think women have a lot of power in terms of consumer power, voter power, but we don't actually know how women conduct activities. We don't know what women want. We don't know if women wear lipstick in Africa. We don't really know any of these things. And without those things, we as women can't actually understand the power that we wield. Because when you think about voting, women are actually a huge voting class if we actually understood that. And if, for example, the electorate, the politicians understood the power that women can wield, because not only do we control our own votes, we can actually control, our family's votes if women were taken seriously. So that's why data is really important. When you're looking at research around data, you don't really find a lot of conversations around things that are real. You have footnotes from 2012 or even earlier talking about Africa as if it was just happening today. So we need to actually revitalize conversations around how do you engage on data, how do you invest in data from an infrastructural perspective, because we can't actually move forward as a continent if we don't have real data.
Interesting. Talk to me about climate change, for example, climate action, and what you folks, the Africa Soft Power Project, is trying to achieve. You're the founder.
So climate, I mean, this is one of the most important issues of our time. Climate, everybody's talking about climate change, climate equity, just transition. And we know that the continent will be the most impacted in terms of the issues around climate and what's going on. But we don't, as Africans, actually connect to the conversation around climate change, because when it's being described, it's described in global, in the global north perspective. So for us here on the continent, we don't understand what it means that ice is melting. Like they talk about ice glaciers melting. That has no connection to us. When you're talking about climate change, you should be talking about, for us, things like deforestation, erosion, things that we know that's happening and things that we can relate to. But yet the language around climate is not anything that Africans can connect to. So part of our conversation is we can't actually have a climate action if we don't have an educated mass of Africans discussing and thinking around how to move the climate conversation from an African perspective. And also when you think about, issues around net zero, can we really go to net zero? Those things are, if we don't educate ourselves, we will actually miss out on the conversations and we will not be in the rooms when these decisions are being made. And that's why it's really important for us to talk about climate. And that's what we're doing with Africa Soft Power as well.
Well, we'll talk about women leadership. I'm sure you women, you will be leading some of the women to this particular Kigali event. So I'm sure it's all about women power. That's not soft power. That's a whole lot of big power. Tell me about that. Let's wrap it up on that note. Nkiru.
So we cannot move the continent forward without women. I personally think, and I think is a fact, that if you do not engage women effectively and actively, we will not go anywhere in the conversation around Africa's progress. We make up half of the continent. And so if we don't engage, we will not move forward. And that's what the continent needs to understand. That's also, in particular, from our point of view, what the private sector needs to understand. So we are very private sector oriented. We're very interested in the workplace. How can the private sector move conversations around gender equity and gender equality? So for us, women are a key issue in anything we do. And so that's why it's not really a women's issue. It is our issue together. It's yours and mine together equally. And that's the only way we can think about it to move forward.
I love that. See you in Kigali. Nkiru Balonwu, founder of the Africa Soft Power Project. Thank you so much. Africa Day, May 25th in Kigali, Rwanda. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.